To convert or not to convert, communicating self-reliance with others. Go ahead, we can all admit it. We've all had our fair share of experiences where we've tried with the best of intentions to convince another individual of the advantages of prepping, only to somehow end up at an impasse. They were not buying it, they were resistant, and perhaps most hurtful of all, they were unappreciative of our goodwill efforts. Now, if you haven't experienced this yet, don't worry. You most likely will eventually at one point or another. It's all part of the journey. It's all part of our path. And if this has happened to you or is happening to you now, do not beat yourself up about it. The question to ask here is this: how exactly does one share self-reliance and avoid the gridlock that is so common? Okay, first off, as a baseline premise, I think it's important for all of us to acknowledge here that each individual is different and carries their own predispositions. It's just the way it is, and we have to respect that. It's what we call inborn character traits, and it's what makes each person unique. Now, some folks are naturally inquisitive, while others are going to be more conformist by nature. Some are naturally distrustful, while others will share their entire lives with you over coffee. It's just the way people are, and this has nothing to do with you or your message of self-reliance. Now, I know that we all know this at some level, but I also think we need to be reminded of this, especially as we interact with the world at large. It's all too easy to internalize any miscommunications. You know, many times it's just part of belonging to this big old crazy planet. So back to the question at hand. How does one share self-reliance and avoid gridlock? I think to answer that we need to examine two common forms of interchange. One is persuasion and the other is sharing. And it's probably wise to take a moment here to savor the distinction between these two modes. So let's take one at a time. Now, persuading another individual to take up the prepper lifestyle is not really bad in and of itself, particularly if you see a need and you're trying to convey your concern. However, it can get a little tricky, and here's why. To persuade another individual is to, in essence, present evidence as a way of building consent, and it's the consent part that gets a little tricky. Remember, if you're persuading somebody, your entire communication experience is linked to consent or on convincing the listener to get it, quote unquote. And if they don't get it, both parties can easily walk away disappointed or confused. And even if we are successful in convincing a non-prepper, there are still some thorns to this approach. That is, if you successfully persuade your friend or loved one to join the cause, so to speak, and they aren't entirely ready for it, you may just end up with a hasty convert. And it's going to take a lot of work on your part to keep feeding that convert the reassurances that they've made the better choice. Better to let them internalize that process for themselves at their own pace. It's their process and they need to own it. Now, how does sharing differ from persuasion? Well, it does so in a couple of big ways. First, when we share, we've not only removed consent from the equation, but we have also released ourselves from the burden of expecting something in return. That is, when we share, we do so without anticipating from the listener a reciprocal interest. And therein is the true power of sharing. Just think about it for a moment. Sharing doesn't try to persuade, but instead allows the merits of your prepping lifestyle to speak for itself. Let me put it another way. The notion of self-reliance doesn't necessarily need or call for door-to-door salesmanship, because it's not a product. It's a way of life. And assuming this way of life almost always comes as the result of a long and hard reassessment of the way we live in modern day society. And that, my friends, is a process that doesn't happen overnight. Listen, rather than selling self-reliance, sharing, on the other hand, allows one to become a living representative of the idea of self-reliance. So go ahead and share a meal of organic homegrown vegetables with a non-prepper. You're not trying to shove these vegetables down their throat. You're rather ingesting together the idea of self-reliance. Now, if I make a video on a particular aspect of survival, for instance, I do so without any expectations on your behalf. If the light bulb comes on for you, I get super happy, but not because you've been converted, but because we are now ingesting together at the table of self-reliance. And I think that's part of what our founding fathers had in mind. If you can pass on self-reliance, and that's a damn good thing. It's good for the nation, it's good for the heart, and it's good for your soul. It makes us better men, better women, and better citizens. If I can be one small part of that vision, I'm a happy person. My friends, in the end, self-reliance and independence can speak for themselves because it comes from a long, long history of individuals who to this very day continue to forge and model its values. And those values are, according to one very important document, self-evident truths. If and when an individual comes to adopt a prepper lifestyle, it will only be because they themselves have come to recognize, perhaps for the very first time, a set of values that have been guiding the better angels of our nature for a very, very long time. This is Analytical Survival saying, stay safe, my brothers and sisters.